Hi everyone. To my surprise, some people are actually interested in copying this Frankenstein of a machine, but honestly, I am thrilled that someone found such a niche project enjoyable. So without further ado, let's dive into the full details on how this was constructed. For the hardware, we're going to need a variety of M4 bolts around 20 millimeters long, M4 nuts, and we're also going to need a wrench to tighten down said nuts. We're also going to need a couple of 1/4 inch bolts. This one's around 150 millimeters long, and then this one I think was around 40 millimeters long. We're also going to need corresponding 1/4 inch bolt nuts. For the body, we're going to need to scale a few aluminum extrusions. Keep in mind you only want to do this on the Z-axis so you don't end up changing the dimensions. This one is 34.5 centimeters, then we're going to need 44 centimeters, 18 centimeters, I think 40.5 centimeters, 49 centimeters, and 14 centimeters. Now I'll make a full list in the description to help keep track of all the cuts that we'll need. Two modifications I did make were as follows. For the 14 centimeter extrusion, I ended up cutting out the back to expose the middle, we'll see why later, and we do need to add a hole in the 34 centimeter extrusion to fit the long 1/4 inch bolt in the middle. Next, we will cover the prints needed for the supports. These, along with my other custom parts, will be on my Thingiverse page linked below. Holding these supports will be more 14 centimeter extrusions, and these corner pieces I used will be linked in the description below. Speaking of supports, here's a look at the side support. I'll also link the T-Nuts that I found below. And lastly, we will need 2 of these main supports printed off to hold the racket. And lastly, for the tensioning mechanism, we'll need to print a knob off to hold the bolt. We will need to print a jaw off. Print off the tension sled. The ratchet wheel holder. The ratchet paw. And lastly, the ratchet wheel itself. With all the prints and materials out of the way, let's get to building. So the frame here, like I mentioned before, we used a variety of brackets. Here are some L brackets that I used, and then all the corners also have these corner brackets that were used. Starting with building the supports, I marked off just on the side of the hole. This is where I'll line up the corners of my supports, and I'll assemble just by sliding them in and tightening them off. Once the base of the supports is assembled, it should look something like this. Now we'll take the side supports and main supports that we printed off and slide them in as well, tightening them off. Make sure with the main supports that they are opposite of each other, facing outwards. Now it's time to add the supports to the frame, and this is where we're going to use our long 1/4 inch bolt. Now I did find a 1/4 inch washer that I'm going to add on, and then I'm going to finally drop the bolt through, lining it up with the middle of the 14 centimeter extrusion. What we will find is that the supports move freely, but a little too freely. There's a lot of play, so to fix this, I ended up cutting the side of the 14cm extrusion open to expose the threads of the 1/4" bolt, and this will let me put some nuts in to help tighten it down a bit. I'm only going to tighten it down hand tight because I still want the head of the supports to be able to rotate freely. For the tensioning mechanism, I'm going to start by inserting the base of the ratchet and paw mechanism, and we're going to tighten it down. Once tightened, I clipped in the paw. Before adding the ratchet wheel, I tied it on to the digital scale in order to connect the two. And to hold the scale, we have our tension sled, and we'll insert this as well. Now, one thing you can do to improve the grip is to add a little bit of high grit sandpaper, but be careful, as if it's too abrasive, it'll damage your strings. As we saw in the last clip, I already added the jaw and pushed in the 1/4" nut. Now all that's left to do is to put the knob on the back of the 1/4" bolt and thread it on. With both the tension sled and ratchet base added, we can now finish by adding our small digital scale and our ratchet wheel onto the ratchet wheel base. Now, you might be wondering, what are these random holes at the back of the tensioning mechanism? Well, originally I intended for a 1/4" bolt to be dropped into both of these, one for a handle, and the other 1/4" bolt to be used as a place where an elastic band could be tied off. However, my elastic band was way too big, and I found it easier to operate without a handle, so I ended up just disregarding it. Some differences between the machine in the last video and the one that's shown here is that the main support was first thickened up because, well, I actually had one snap on me, and then I added some more T-nuts to help hold it securely in place. This is because the most catastrophic failure I had was the main support moved on me. I didn't tighten it down all the way, and that caused the racket to compress until it could not compress no more. And to keep the failure train rolling, although I didn't have any catastrophic failures with the side supports, I did find the original design was a little too flimsy. My solution was to thicken it up, but the next iteration was a little too thick since you couldn't quite get the strings through. And so finally I settled on a thicker, but yet slim enough design that you can still get the strings around it. And that concludes the more detailed video on the stringing machine. If you'd like to see this design in action, check out the first video, and there'll be links in the description below for all the parts that were discussed. Thank you for watching.